Benvenuti al Caffè dell'Alchimista.
Efficient exercise is based around, high intensity training principles.
Ad ogni puntata, ospiti d'eccezione.
To the mitochondria faster than it can take up. The pyruvate stacks up out here in the cytoplasm.
Per parlare degli elementi per una vita migliore. Dalla dieta alla nutrizione, al fitness e all'esercizio fisico.
This is so important is because type 2 diabetes is 100% preventable.
Passando attraverso il sonno, il recupero, la gestione dello stress, il lavoro e la produttività.
Quindi il corpo riesce a rigenerarsi invece sta lì a combattere questa
dislocazione errata delle energie del nostro sistema immunitario.
Useremo strumenti come Ayurveda, Biohacking e altri mirati a vivere una vita migliore.
Il digiuno intermittente promuove l'autofagia.
Al lavoro sono causa di stress.
Un percorso per il vero e proprio alchimista dei tempi moderni.
It's a positive thing in that sense that people become a little bit more aware and more interested in.
Un aumento di quelle che sono le funzioni cognitive.
Per studiare e conoscere noi stessi. Un poco meglio.
Quando noi sottoponiamo il nostro organismo a un determinato stress, possiamo parlare di allenamenti, quindi un allenamento.
Un percorso per prendere coscienza di quello che esiste, di quello che non serve, che non c'è necessario, e trasmutarlo in qualcosa di utile, di positivo, di valore, al fine di vivere una vita in pieno e al massimo potenziale, nel corpo e nella mente. E voi, siete pronti a farne parte?
Okay, very good, Mario. Good talk with you, buddy. Keep it up. You're doing good stuff. This is important what you're doing, getting the word out.
Il caffè di oggi ha un'area abbastanza internazionale. Lo prendiamo con Teemu Arina, finlandese di nascita, è un imprenditore, un autore e uno speaker professionale. Ha parlato in tutto il mondo, San Francisco, New York, America, Giappone e Russia. A Teemu piace molto la fotografia, ma soprattutto il self-quantification, però come migliorare le proprie performance fisiche e mentali utilizzando le più avanzate tecniche di biohacking. L'intervista che andrete ad ascoltare è in lingua inglese, con alcune parti in italiano da parte mia per facilitarvi un po' la comprensione, se necessario. Teemu parlerà di biohacking, di come è stato introdotto a queste discipline e come la sua routine, cosa preferisce e cosa non preferisce, anche parlando dell'Italia, dato che è stato ospite molte volte. Ottimizzare la performance umana. Vediamo come fare con i consigli di Teemu. Come potete sentire, the coffee is ready. Il caffè è pronto. Andiamo a berlo con un finlandese adesso. Grazie e buon ascolto. Ciao Teemu, come va? Benvenuti al nostro caffè. Ci siamo incontrati virtualmente qualche tempo fa quando ero ancora a Dubai, ma non ci siamo mai incontrati di persona. Innanzitutto, come va? Come stai?
I mean, I'm good. The sun is shining here in Helsinki. It's been a long winter plus coronavirus craziness, but here in Finland things are, in terms of coronavirus, I mean, we're a small country, 5.5 million people. Things didn't get out of hand as drastically as I guess in Italy, so the lockdown has not been that drastic, so I've been able to move around and so on, but of course the restaurants are closed, but they're actually opening up restaurants I think next week, and they already started opening borders here as well. So I mean, it's exciting times. I think these kind of events remind people about the importance of comprehensive approach to health, especially in terms of preventive healthcare.
Sicuramente questi periodi ricordano il valore della salute e della medicina preventiva. Ma andiamo già straight to the point. Cos'è il biohacking e come ci può aiutare?
And biohacking is all about understanding the human body and its environment, internally and externally, and basically to balance things in that homeostatic biological system that also leads to better health, better immunity. So if we think of building resilience in human beings, the viruses that are going around, it could be coronavirus or any other virus, the only natural way to prevent that is to take care of your immune system. And it's not only that you avoid contracting something like that, but also to avoid getting serious complications. And there is a lot of studies out there, for example, about the coronavirus, but also other RNA viruses and so on, how inadequate nutrient intake, for example, low vitamin D levels or low selenium or zinc can affect your ability to fight off intruders. So I think it's a time when we don't have a medical treatment for something like this readily available and still research and just about to be discovered, that people realize that the only treatment for something like this is preventive, and it makes people more interested in taking care of their health. So I see this as a positive thing in that sense, that people become a little bit more aware and more interested in their own health. So it's been very busy for me. I mean, frankly, I have to say that I've had a lot of fun in quarantine. Like, I've been working quite a lot on webinars and different online events and ebooks, for example, the Biohacker's Flu Guide that I started writing in January when I first saw some of the news coming out. So it's been very busy time for me. In terms of business, it's being also going pretty well because we are already online. I organized the Biohacker Summit, which is a physical event. Our spring event in Amsterdam got postponed, but the Helsinki event is going to happen later this year. So it gave us the opportunity to focus more on that event and also to announce completely digital conferences like the Health Hacking Summit that I've been doing. We did the first one on the pandemic situation, and the second one that's coming up is going to be more about optimizing work, especially remotely. So, I mean, we are doing this podcast digitally. In companies, virtual meetings has been a thing that has been coming for years, but now it's becoming reality faster than any chief information officer in any company would have thought. So there's always another side to crisis. In Chinese, the character for crisis actually is also simultaneously opportunity. So I see there's always, in the darkness you can see light. The stronger the shadow, the stronger the light. So I think there's always something good coming out of these kind of things. So if you think of the Second World War, a lot of advancements happened in medicine and technology because of the war. So I think it's the same with these kind of global pandemics. People get more and more interested in how to technologically prevent disease and deal with this situation. So human species is extremely resilient and adaptive, and I see good things coming out of this also.
Sicuramente è molto interessante, soprattutto questo punto di vista di raggiungere degli sviluppi, dei livelli di sviluppo elevatissimi in periodi di grossa crisi e di grossi elementi disruptive. Ma una curiosità, cosa stai bevendo in questo momento?
I mean, I'm drinking medicinal mushrooms right now with my coffee, and medicine mushrooms, polypore mushrooms that grow on trees specifically produce extremely strong antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal compounds. And if we take an example of the study of mushrooms that led and molds that led into the discovery of something in medicine, it was penicillin that was figured out during the war times, that when they did experiments, they noticed that the specific strains of molds were producing natural antibacterial, antiviral compounds that fight off the disease that they were trying to treat. So the same is now being discovered about many other compounds. So I'm a firm believer in nature's ability to come up with solutions. And you could see also that a virus is a way of testing the whole biological ecosystem. And it's a mandatory process for any species to evolve. And throughout history, we have seen every 100 years or so, some kind of virus or bacteria wiping out 10 to 40% of human population of this planet. Now, in modern times, this has not happened recently, but we have had a lot of epidemics, small ones, but not big ones until this one. Unless you take something like the AIDS virus that jumped out of primates to humans. But there is always these things coming and going, and that's part of the way of building resilience on a systemic level. So if you just take a bird-eye view and make it less personal, you start to see that this is definitely important process for evolution of human species. Now we are in a time when we can extend lifespan. Actually, in modern times, in the last 200 years, we've been able to double life expectancy, and it has been partly because of industrialization, and industrialization also in terms of our food delivery systems and hygiene and so on. So it has made things much easier, and modern healthcare and medicine has helped to extend lifespan. So it's very unlikely for someone my or your age to die of an infectious disease. So it's much more likely that you die in a car accident, for example. But the interesting thing here is that as we double lifespan from, let's say, average lifespan of 40 to 80 years or 90, I think in Finland it's now around 84 or something like this. As you extend lifespan, you're actually making the species less resilient, because what is needed for the process of adaptation is life and death. Basically, you are born and you pick up information from the environment, epigenetics, that then influences gene expression, and it basically makes genes that are fruitful for your survival to be passed down to offspring. Now, the faster this process is, the faster the adaptation, obviously, to environmental conditions. Now, if we expand lifespans by doubling life expectancy simultaneously while we increase exponentially the change in our physical environment, meaning food chain or industrialization, the air that we breathe, whatever, there is less time for adaptation. So to me, it seems, just from a transhumanistic point of view, that we need to start modifying the human species in one way or another. Or we need to start dying earlier for the natural process to take place. So if the natural process doesn't happen fast enough, the species on a collective level becomes weaker to the changing conditions. Now, if you take technologies, and technologies, those could be modern medicine, those could be nature, technologies coming out of nature. So
Alternativo punto di vista, direi. Sicuramente interessante. Ma tu come biohacker, esattamente, a cosa sei interessato?
As a biohacker, I'm looking at self-quantification, what works for me, but I'm informed by science and experts. I'm also interested in natural remedies as much as I'm interested in modern pharmaceuticals and technologies coming out of medicine. I think, and also technologies like wearables and activity trackers and so on, and the data and the big data, artificial intelligence, everything that goes into it. I'm just curious, like, how we can influence the process of our own evolution to extend our lifespans. I think that's a noble goal, but simultaneously I see there is a challenge right there, the weak point, which is basically how do we make sure that we are also resilient in terms of our environment. And this is actually the topic of our next book after the Biohacker's Handbook that we published last year, the new book that is coming out. Yeah, so we are working on a new book that is called The Resilient Being, which is focusing on how do you build resilience from the level of a single individual cell up to the level of the organism and to its connection to its environment. I think it's very important in these times, not just from the perspective of building a strong immune system, but also to build or just to be a thriving human being. But it's also important for the species in general, because partly modern times, especially last 50 years, we have seen the increase of metabolic disease, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, all kinds of degenerative diseases that accelerate because of our modern lifestyle is not supportive of good health. Now, it could be possible that in some decades, our biology might adapt to the fact that we're getting more sugar, or that we sit long periods of time and we don't exercise that much anymore. It might be that it's less relevant, like down the road, that our biology finds a way to adapt to this condition. But I don't think you or me have the time for it. So we are more interested in, okay, so this is the current status quo. How do we make sure that we are in tune with that environment? And that's why I'm interested in studying not just modern approaches to health and medicine, but also ancient techniques and technologies that have been used for thousands of years. Not just, I mean, there's things like meditation and yoga and herbal medicine and many other systems. So I find a lot of value from systems like the Ayurvedic medicine and the Chinese medicine. I'm at the same time, I've been grown up by European Aristotelian logic, scientific vigor. So I'm definitely reading the papers. So if I take a supplement like, I don't know, chaga, which is here, it's a medicinal mushroom, I like to read the 800 or so studied publications and see what the science is actually saying about them. And then I might go and see what the folk medicine is saying about them. And I see some things are definitely generational wisdom that has accumulated, and some of those are just beliefs. And but in the end, if you look at Ayurvedic medicine, and there is ideas, for example, on body types, that some people are, there is Kapha and Pitta and these other body types in Ayurvedic system. I see those as abstractions of genetic differences that an observation was made. And now with modern science, we can see more concretely why people are different, although we share most of our genes with each other. The small differences make a big difference, for example, in terms of metabolism. So there is some truth to ancient systems. And when you look at dietary systems that might extend lifespans, we are looking now at, for example, Mediterranean diet as something that is beneficial, or what centenarians seem to be eating in different locations around the world, so-called blue zones, where they live long lives, like Okinawa in Japan, where they eat a lot of seafood, or some islands in Greece. We study their diets and what they eat, and there is very little similarities, but I see some similarities, and and that's actually outlined in the Biohacker's Handbook, that the food quality is much higher. It's locally produced, it's accessible, it's fresh, it's not usually mass produced for these groups of people. They eat slowly with friends. The lifestyle is less driven by modern busy city life. So you actually walk up and down mountains or riversides to meet friends, and they might smoke tobacco and drink some wine, but still in the end their diet is full of polyphenols and nutrients. It might be that seafood with its readily available iodine and many medicinal compounds are useful for the Japanese, Okinawan, while on the Mediterranean diet, more of the plant polyphenols are the key thing. But once we study these different systems, and if you look at, I spoke about Ayurvedic system, you look at India, why do vegetarians who don't eat meat products have okay levels of omega-3? While at the same time we see that plants are the main source of omega-6 and seafood is the source of omega-3. And it turns out that things like turmeric seems to increase the spices they use. The spices they use in their food seems to increase the bioavailability of plant-sourced omega-3 oils. So there is some accumulated wisdom in different dietary practices around the world. And I'm very interested in these things. And if you take a modern scientific approach, the challenge is that the best we have right now is a reductionist logic. So you try to reduce a complex system into single variables, and you study which variable is doing what. Now, if you take that approach, you end up with things like vitamin C. You're not studying the orange, you're studying vitamin C. You look at what is the active compound. If you are looking at medicinal mushrooms, there is many different compounds in something like this that you don't even know yet anything about in science, but there are some things that seem to have the highest effect, for example, beta-glucans. If you take a blueberry, the blueberry is not only the complexity of nutrients that are in there and compounds, but you might look at something like anthocyanins in there as beneficial. Now, that's great, but the problem is that there is synergestics that happen biologically. So when you take something like that, hundreds of different compounds simultaneously, those seem to have some kind of cross-link that they interact with each other as they go through your metabolic pathways. And that is where its power really comes from. So if you isolate.
Grazie Teemu, molto interessante. In pratica, riassumendo, ci dici che c'è del vero anche nella tradizione e soprattutto tu leggi molto, leggi pubblicazioni scientifiche, ma leggi anche storie folcloristiche, tradizioni come la Ayurveda, la medicina cinese. C'è della verità in qualche modo, e alcune derivate dall'esperienza, alcune dalla fantasia, dalle superstizioni, ma in generale di fondo c'è qualche verità. E poi parlando del complesso, i sistemi complessi, noi siamo sistemi complessi sicuramente, estraendo un singolo elemento dal complesso, ad esempio fatto dei polifenoli dalle blueberries, dai mirtilli, non certo ingerendo per esempio solo ed esclusivamente quel singolo elemento possiamo avere gli stessi risultati sinergici che possiamo ottenere quando noi per esempio ingeriamo un frutto intero piuttosto che un estratto. Puoi darci anche qualche altro esempio, tipo vitamina C?
vitamin C and you only take that, it doesn't necessarily have the same effect as eating a diet that is rich in vitamin C. Now that's kind of the problem, is when we study specific compounds and intakes, we can't really study complexity, so we just try to break it down into single variables. And that's what our medicine has done, trying to extract from that specific mold or mushroom things like penicillin, and then we use that as medicine. Now that's great. It's statistically extremely relevant. But what I'm interested also is the complexity of things that we don't even know yet anything about. And it's known by practitioners of, let's say, herbal medicine, that if you take an extract of a specific compound, it might have a very different effect. It can be less stable also biologically than if you took the whole, like, full spectrum extract. So that's the thing, is if you have a very noticeable effect that something is hacking directly your pathways in a certain way, there is often a side effect. And that's the problem with modern medicine, is that we have a lot of side effects for drugs, and some things work for some people, some don't. Now, if you eat a diverse diet, we just know statistically that that's good for health. For example, for diversity of gut bacteria, and there is many complex interactions, not just nutrition levels. So that's kind of my approach. So I'm looking holistically, but I'm taking reductionist approach at the same time, looking at the scientific evidence and trying to see how these things correlate and how they are related. And often there is no direct correlation. There is causation. Correlation is not causation. So in the end, practicing something like biohacking, where I measure my different variables, I look at single variables like my sleep quality or different blood values or whatever, it's still an art as much as it is a science. Just like medicine, many doctors, in the end, they're very good at heuristically, based on their experience, to figure out, okay, this treatment might work for this person, but we are not entirely sure if that's going to work, but I have a gut feeling that it might work based on my experience. So that's kind of where we end up with, once you go to the very advanced level of dealing with something, is you can take a one-size-fits-all approach to many things. Like, you can look at dietary guidelines, like what is the minimum intake. But in the end, to find optimal health, the last mile of optimizing the last mile is not that easy. And it requires a lifelong, iterative, experiential process also of actually trying things yourself, so that you figure out, like, okay, this works for me, or this works for other people who I work with. So I'm fascinated about what's possible with modern technology in this context. Yeah, let me give you an example. So if we take Japanese kind of diet, which is very much seafood, and you have algae and you have seaweeds and things that like that. Scientists have discovered that certain algae, seaweeds, and so on, they actually bind heavy metals in the seafood. We know heavy metals are not good because they compete with essential minerals in the body in terms of nutrient utilization. And we highlight things like seafood and how important it is, but the much more balanced approach is actually to eat some seaweed with it, because then it probably brings also some fiber and so on. It might help absorption in a certain way, or digestive functioning, but also it might help you to reduce the load of potential heavy metals from seafood. So that's just an example of the complexity of interaction. So I always try to have some wakame or nori leaves with my seafood if possible, because of this reason. And now in many countries there is sushi restaurants. Everyone has a sushi restaurant, but it really requires lifelong skill to prepare fresh raw fish properly. For example, when the Japanese sushi chefs, when they cut a fish, they know exactly which parts to leave out. Or they might, when they cut the fish so that they take the skin off, they might leave like 1 millimeter of flesh still on the skin, because they know that the parasites actually, when they penetrate the fish skin, they don't go, for example, more than 1 millimeter deep from the surface. So in that way, you are taking care of the health of your clients as well. So knowing how to prepare these things is very important. The source and the quality is extremely important. So if you take salmon that has been farm-fed, it doesn't necessarily have the same nutritional profile as a wild one. But as biohackers, I mean, they're interested in the details, and they want to, get to the nuts and bolts of what they're actually eating. And I see that partly as it's a Western movement. It's when you have, your basic needs in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You have your home, you have some income, you have some food. Then you start to think what my food has been eating, where it's coming from, what's the quality. So it's when you have more time, you start to get creative in these ways. So, but the problem in the world is definitely the populations who are eating crap food because it's cheap and they can't afford anything else. And those are huge numbers of populations. In countries where their traditional diet has been replaced by modern mass-produced food. When I was traveling in Peru, in Latin America, I remember the diversity of the foods that they locally had in different places, but at the same time, the poorest people were eating the most mass-produced food ever. And you see that you can go in a westernized country anywhere. You go to Italy, you go to US, you go to Finland, and the poorest people, they buy the cheapest stuff from Lidl, or they go to a hamburger chain, and it's not nutrient dense.
Grazie Teemu per queste considerazioni, sicuramente andranno approfondite. Comunque tu sei stato in Italia molte volte, ne abbiamo parlato prima, ma cosa ti piace di più dell'Italia? Facci sapere, giusto una curiosità.
What I really value about Italians is the I would say kind of importance you put on food quality regionally, like that you're not from Italy, you are from Milan, or you're from Parma, or you're from Sicily or whatever, and you value the local cooking and what your mother made, which came from your land, and I think that is what can save Italians in the end, is that kind of appreciation to the immediate physical environment and culture, and keeping that alive and not replacing it with some imported dream from America, which is mass produced. Because those people over there are the sickest people on the earth, in a way, pun intended.
Sicuramente anche io personalmente, avendo vissuto in America, a Houston, Texas, per più di 4 anni, posso confermare che la variabilità in quello che si trova, come si trova, e soprattutto l'attenzione alla dieta è molto variabile, e sicuramente hai ragione. Ma tu, so che da biohacker hai attentamente studiato la dieta italiana, la dieta mediterranea, in particolare cosa noi italiani tipicamente mangiamo, vero?
Yeah, I actually did look into things like pasta, and it seems that the blood sugar effect of it is less compared to eating bread or some other wheat product. And it turns out that the way how it's kind of produced with eggs and so on is kind of slowing down the blood sugar spike. So when I'm in Italy, I'm happy to make a little exception, having my primi, little bit of pasta to go with. And I don't feel that tired after eating a small amount compared to if I ate a piece of bread. But I noticed that when I was in Italy, and I visit there often, partly because I've been invited to speak there on a yearly basis for a long period of time, is that it's very, very hard to eat kind of a ketogenic lifestyle if you wanted. But at the same time, I also don't want to be hardcore strict with my dietary decisions, but take into account what is kind of the local culture and so on. So when I'm in Italy, I'm happy to have, a small dish of pasta. That's fine. But have you noticed that in many restaurants, they always bring bread first? And they all now know from scientific studies that if you prime your system with some protein, so you have some kind of antipasti, basically. So you have a little bit of ham or cheese or something like this, a little bit of protein. You wait a little bit and then you eat some fast sugars like wheat products. The blood sugar spike will be less than if you went the other way around, that you had some fast absorbing carbohydrates and then you had some protein. So I think it's a bit pity that we are being trained that when you're hungry, here's a piece of bread. We should definitely follow the Mediterranean approach that if you feel hungry, here is something salty, protein to begin with, and then go for the food slowly. And that's a much better dietary approach. So if you're having breakfast and you like your cereal, I would first have some eggs and bacon, wait a little bit, and then maybe have the cereal. So I think within any diet, you can make improvements. So that's kind of my point. You don't have to go strictly ketogenic, and that's the only approach that works, or strictly Paleolithic. But within any diet, there's improvements that you can take in terms of food choices. So you can make upgrades and improvements within food groups. Instead of just like some regular lettuce or salad, you can have some rucola, and maybe your tomato, and maybe instead of having some cheap mozzarella, you can have some buffalo mozzarella. So I'm a big fan of it, and the protein structure seems to be different. So I'm a lactose intolerant, but with buffalo mozzarella, I'm just fine. I'm not eating too much of milk products, but some aged cheese, like some Parmigiano, I'm okay to even eat a bigger piece. So within any cultural dietary recommendation and system, there is improvements that you can do. Now, if you are having a tomato, you can have a tomato that's produced in a greenhouse with the least amount of nutrients possible. It's big, but it's not juicy. It's not tasty. You can taste that it's kind of half raw. But then when you have a really nice local Italian tomato from your grandma's garden, man, that's explosion in your mouth. So why would you go and have that greenhouse version when you have that available? So that's kind of how I look at food, is that there is always improvements in terms of nutrient density, in terms of quality, in terms of sourcing, in terms of preparation, in terms of sequence in which you take them, in terms of what works for your body and what works for someone else. So it's my favorite topic, and I definitely love Italy.
E noi amiamo anche la nostra bella Italia. Tornando agli eventi che tu organizzi di natura internazionale, tra gli eventi ce n'è uno ad Helsinki, se non mi sbaglio. Qual è il soggetto dell'evento e se l'evento sarà ancora organizzato a causa Covid?
The Helsinki Summit topic is from lifespan to health span. So it's about life extension, but looking at healthy extension of life. So not just living in tubes with medication and barely alive, but how do you increase your quality years in your life? Basically, that's kind of the topic we want to focus on there. The Amsterdam Summit is focusing on transpersonal psychology. So the topic is hack the ego, and that's where we are looking at the biggest limitation to your growth, which is you, basically, sabotaging your own patterns of behavior. And that's where we focus more about behavior change and the mind and psychology and personal improvement and stuff like that.
Grazie Teemu, sicuramente informativo e apprezziamo. Torniamo a te e ai tuoi biohacks, alle tue routine. Cosa stai sperimentando in questo periodo?
I've been looking into combining different biohacks together. So there is, only that much time in a one day. So personally, I like to have these different protocols. We actually documented together with Dr. Olli Sovijärvi some of our protocols on Ben Greenfield's blog. You can find it over there. Also, I think BiohackerSummit.com blog has some of those protocols, but I have an immunity protocol and also have a recovery protocol. And the recovery protocol right now is basically lying on a mattress which is vibrating. We use neurosonic for that. So that kind of activates your lymphatic system and relaxes the body extremely effectively and helps microcirculation. Then you might be lying on a spike mat, so that increase the production of endorphins and increase blood flow on the surface of the skin. Then you might be having this is a new device that I'm using with it. This is Sense8, and it basically is a ultrasonic sound device that you put on your collarbone, and it vibrates in certain frequencies, and it's extremely relaxing. And it comes from somatic techniques for trauma release. Basically, the fact that the body stores stress, and it helps the body to release the stress in a way. And I use that in combination with binaural beats, so I use some kind of noise-canceling headphones. I might have some essential oils going on, like lavender to relax. I might take some supplements like reishi mushrooms. And so that's something I do with some breathing techniques and meditation, 20 minutes. It's very effective. For immunity, I like to combine infrared sauna with some supplements, some strong, maybe make a tea, strong spices, medicine mushrooms, some niacin to work synergistically with an infrared sauna, but at the same time also to help nutrient delivery across the blood-brain barrier. And combining that with, if possible, also traditional Finnish sauna. So also having the heat component, not just the infrared component. And then going to some kind of ice bath. In the winter, it could be ice swimming. In this time of the year, it could be ice bath. Now, unfortunately, I don't have access right now to my second apartment where I actually usually do these things. But I'm really looking forward to being able to travel after this coronavirus craziness, and just have this protocol every day like I used to. When it comes to exercise, I like to use X3 bar. I think it's very effective using resistance training, and you can combine that with whole body vibration. You could even do something like electrostimulation. You could use something like supplements, for example, beetroot to increase blood flow. So I like to experiment with combination of things. That makes it very interesting to me. So I have different protocols for different things. And with sleep, I've been playing around with micro dosing of melatonin. So instead of macro doses like 1 or 2 milligrams, I take like 0.1 or 0.2 milligrams. So I think in my age group, there is little benefit of doing it too much. So combining that with maybe some herbs that are relaxing and good pillow. So yeah.
Grazie Teemu, e con questi biohacks, consigli per gli acquisti, direi noi invitiamo anche i nostri ascoltatori a sintonizzarvi sui siti e sugli eventi organizzati da Teemu e dal team dei Biohackers, biohackersummit.com, healthhackingsummit.com. Troverete tutto nella descrizione di questo podcast. Dico grazie a te e grazie agli ascoltatori e al prossimo caffè.
I appreciate that. So take care and live long.